At Thanksgiving dinner, my dad said, "We used your savings on some better kids." I asked, "Better than my own?" My mom smiled coldly. "You should be proud to sacrifice for your stepbrother's family." That's when Grandma stood up, faced them, and yelled, "Name those kids. Right now." "We spent your savings on some better kids," my dad said at Thanksgiving like he was commenting on the weather. No pause, no shame. I blinked and said, "Better than my kids?" And that's when my mom gave this little smirk that told me she thought she'd won something. She told me I should feel proud that I was making sacrifices for my stepbrother's family. That's when my grandmother pushed her chair back, stood up with a hard look on her face, and shouted, "Name those kids right now." My name is Mark. I'm 36. I fly commercial jets for a living. I'm the oldest of three, the guy who always has a go bag ready and keeps his phone volume cranked up. I like flight plans, checklists, quiet cockpits at 3 in the morning, and coffee that tastes like it was a mistake. I fly Denver and Seattle a lot, sometimes overseas. I've missed more birthdays than I like to admit, but I never miss sending a gift. When I get home, I overtip because gate agents and ground crews save my sanity more than anyone realizes. My family calls me responsible, and they say it like it's a condition I carry around with me. Thanksgiving is the one holiday I make a real effort not to miss. Even if that means landing, showering at a crash pad, and showing up smelling like jet fuel mixed with cheap soap. This year I walked into my parents' house carrying a grocery store pie, 2 boxes of dinner rolls, and a sharp ache behind my right eye from a red-eye flight, followed by traffic. "Mark's here," my mom called out from the kitchen, sounding upbeat in a way that felt like she wanted witnesses. I hugged my grandma first, and she squeezed my arm like she was making sure I was still solid. "You look worn out, sweetheart," she said, and I told her it came with the job. My stepbrother, Jason, was already stretched out on the couch with his shoes off and socks worn thin and gray at the heels, while his wife, Lauren, scrolled her phone nonstop like each swipe earned her a paycheck. Their twin kids ran laps around the coffee table and nearly took out a paper turkey centerpiece. I set the food on the counter, sidestepped a boiling pot, and washed my hands while my dad carved the turkey like it had personally wronged him. He nodded at me and asked how the sky was doing, if it was still up there, and I shot back asking how retirement was treating him, which he loved. He was about to answer when my mom leaned in and said we should do grace first, real casual, like it had just occurred to her. Plates lined up, steam rising, forks clanking, the dog whining, everything loud and familiar. Grandma tapped the chair next to her, and I sat. Dad cleared his throat and thanked God for family, opportunity, and generous hearts, and we all echoed amen. I passed the rolls while Jason grabbed the biggest slice of turkey breast like he was in a contest, and I laughed because I was trying to stay agreeable. Then my mom tilted her head, put on that bright smile, and raised her voice just enough to carry. "Mark, we should probably update you, since you're here," she said. I froze with the gravy boat in my hand and asked what kind of update she meant. Jason kept chewing, Lauren never looked up, and my dad didn't even blink when he said, "We spent your savings on some better kids," calm as if he were reading off a recipe card. I just stared, trying to process how words could sound so quiet and still feel explosive. I repeated, "Better than my kids?" And my mom smirked again and told me I should feel proud of myself for supporting my stepbrother's family. The gravy hit my plate hard enough to splash. The twins squealed, and Grandma shoved her chair back and stood slowly, her face tight as stone, pointing at my parents like a ref calling a foul. "Name those kids," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the room. "Name them right now." The dog went silent, and so did I, as something cold settled behind my ribs, the same feeling I get from unexpected turbulence when you don't see the bump coming and then everything drops. I set the gravy down and asked what they were talking about, my voice sounding distant, like I was talking through radio static. Mom laughed lightly and said not to make it dramatic, but Grandma cut her off and repeated, louder, that she wanted them to name the children they'd just called better. Dad's jaw tightened. Jason finally stopped chewing, and Lauren flipped her phone face down like that alone made her respectful. My mom told Grandma to sit down, calling her mother in that warning tone, but Grandma didn't move and instead looked straight at me and said softly, "Marcus, listen." I already was, every nerve alert, my chest feeling like a plane starting to roll. I grew up with a flight map taped to my ceiling, not because I was romantic about travel, but because I liked knowing escape routes. When my parents split, I learned young that being useful kept me out of the blast zone, so I mowed lawns, fixed Wi-Fi, and drove my little sister, Lily, to piano lessons. When Mom remarried, Jason came into the house like a loud commercial interrupting a quiet show, and I didn't hate him. We were just teenagers with different interests, him chasing sneakers and attention, me buried in weather books and flying a simulator on a dying laptop. Mom told me to set a good example, and I did, keeping my head down, graduating, joining the Air National Guard because it was the only way I could fly without crushing debt, and eventually clawing my way into the right seat of a 737. I stacked money into a high-yield savings account I jokingly named Runway, adding to it every month, every delay, every lonely hotel overnight with ugly brown carpet. Not because I was greedy, but because I wanted a buffer so Lily would never have to beg for help, and so someday I could have a family without living in panic. My parents knew the Runway Fund existed, not the amount, just the idea, and I kept it separate and kept quiet. But when you're always the guy paying for airport parking, people notice, and it turns into a story where Mark's got it, sounds like praise, but really isn't. My mom loves saying family money is flexible, which really means my money is shared and theirs isn't. And she used that line when Jason needed tires, when Lauren's bridal shower went over budget, and when my dad wanted to loan money to a friend who was always about to pay him back. I said no every time and got labeled cold and ungrateful for it. But when Lily got accepted into flight school last year and called me crying from the parking lot, I told her I'd help before she even asked, meaning the deposit and the first semester, and we made a plan together, complete with a spreadsheet laid out like a flight plan, legs, fuel, and backup options. I put the Runway Fund to use, and honestly, it felt exactly like what it was meant for, like the plan finally lining up with the moment. I told my mom because I was genuinely happy, and she said, "Finally, you're doing something meaningful with all that money." Then followed it up with a warning to be careful, because, as she put it in that sing-song voice, you know how women get with careers and babies, like she was reminding me to grab a jacket. I ignored it because Lily had grit, the kind you don't teach, the kind she showed when she once held a flashlight for me under a Corolla at midnight while I changed a belt, and that was the kind of person I was willing to bet on. In August, I was flying a 4-day trip, and on the second day, during a short sit in Phoenix, my phone blew up with 6 missed calls from Lily, 2 from Grandma, and 1 from an unknown number, followed by a text from Mom telling me to call when I landed and adding that it was nothing major, just logistics, which I knew meant it was absolutely something. When I called back, Lily's voice was too calm, and she said, "It's okay," which always means it isn't, then told me Mom and Dad said they'd help since I was busy, and that they said I'd told them it was fine if they handled tuition, so I shouldn't stress. I told her flat out that I never said that, stepping into a corner of the crew room, and asked where she was, and she said she was standing in line at the registrar, and that Lauren had come with her because she knew financial stuff. I checked the clock and saw I had 9 minutes before pre-flight, told Lily not to sign anything, and said I'd wire the deposit that night, but she hesitated and said they already paid it and claimed it was easier that way. I asked who paid it, and she said Dad did, from my account, and tried to reassure me that it was fine. I stared at my phone like it was gaslighting me and asked her what account she meant, and she said the Runway Fund, calling it gently by name, and explained that they said I'd given them the login because I was flying and that family money is flexible. She asked me not to be upset and added that Jason had found a discount if they bundled it with his stuff, and when I asked what exactly that meant, my voice climbing into that tight nasal place I hate, she said it was little things like Jason's business credit and the twins' preschool fees, just temporary, and that he said it all evened out. I swallowed hard and told her to put Mom on, but she said Mom was parking and that she had to go, and I cut in as the PA chimed and a gate agent waved me over, repeating, "Do not sign anything," like a prayer before flying a plane full of strangers safely to San Jose while a storm brewed behind my eyes. That night, alone in a hotel room that smelled like oranges and old carpet, I opened my banking app and hit an error screen, tried again and got locked out, then received a text about unusual activity and confirmed my device before finally getting in and seeing numbers that made no sense. I scrolled through transfers draining out with memos like family bundle, church raffle, Jason, vendor hold, Lauren, education consult, twin tuition catch-up, and then at the bottom, an ACH payment to a school that wasn't Lily's, which I copied and searched only to find it was a private academy across town for Jason's twins. I called my mom with shaking hands, and she answered in that calm voice she uses when she knows she's wrong, and told me I was probably confused by the labels, and I said plainly that she took my savings, to which she replied that they redirected it because I'm gone all the time and don't need it like the kids do. I told her my sister is the kid, and she replied brightly that Jason's kids are too, that they're part of us, and then added that Lauren's classes mattered because she was getting a certificate to help manage Jason's business. I stared at the ceiling and told her she stole from me, and she told me not to be dramatic and reminded me that my father had power of attorney from when I was deployed, and when I said I hadn't been deployed in years and that authorization had expired, there was a pause where I could hear her breathing before she said the bank didn't say anything and that we're family. That night, I wrote every transaction down on hotel stationery because I needed to see it in ink, adding columns, totaling everything, and sending screenshots to my dad, my mom, Jason, Lauren, and Grandma, because she's the only one who tells the truth, along with a message saying no more transfers, freeze everything now, we're meeting at Thanksgiving, don't touch Lily's tuition, and refund everything else. Dad replied telling me to calm down, and that they'd make me whole. Jason sent a thumbs-up emoji. Lauren said we should talk when I wasn't flying. Mom said they couldn't refund a preschool and told me not to be selfish, and Grandma replied with a single line saying she'd be there. I added 2 more deposits to the runway fund from my next paychecks, because I'm apparently the kind of idiot who tries to fight a fire with more fuel and a map, then called my bank to set new guardrails, lock down access, and watch confirmation emails roll in like digital sandbags against a flood I didn't cause. By the time Thanksgiving came around, I'd rehearsed a calm, data-driven speech in my head, dates and numbers lined up like a radio call while rerouting around weather, but then my dad said, "Better kids." Grandma stood up, locked eyes with him, and told him to say their names, to say exactly who was better than Mark's children. And when Dad put the knife down and folded his hands like he wanted to look reasonable, she snapped back. Names. Sharp and final. Jason gave a short half laugh and said she was obviously talking about the twins, and my dad cut in that he knew exactly who she meant, heat finally creeping into his voice as he looked straight at me and said, "Mark, you don't even have kids." I stared back at him while the room swayed for a second and then snapped into sharp focus, and I said my kids are my responsibilities, tapping the table with one steady finger as I listed them off. Lily's tuition, the down payment I've been saving so my future family starts out secure, the emergencies I plan for because life has a habit of showing up at 2 in the morning over Nebraska. Lauren scoffed and called me a poet, but Grandma didn't budge and told them again to name the children, and Dad's jaw locked as he finally said Jason's twins and future kids, the young ones in our family, because that's where they were investing. I looked at Lily and saw her clutching her napkin like she might drop it, her eyes glossy as she tried to speak, and I cut her off gently and told her never her, not ever. Mom smiled like she thought she'd finally framed the argument just right and said this was what they'd tried to explain at the registrar, that money should flow where it creates the most value. And Grandma repeated the word value, so quietly it chilled the room. Jason leaned back and told me it wasn't personal, that I was a pilot who kept getting paid, and that schools don't care about hurt feelings. So I reached down, pulled my backpack closer, and laid a folder on the table with printed statements, a handwritten ledger, and timestamps I'd already memorized. I told them these were the transfers, the dates, the accounts, the exact amounts taken for preschool, consulting, Jason's credit card bill disguised as a vendor hold, Dad's church raffle donation that somehow came out of my account, and the family laptop currently sitting in Lauren's Instagram story next to a ring light. Lauren's mouth tightened and she accused me of snooping, and I told her she posted it, while Mom waved it off and told me to stop being petty, which is when I slid out another sheet and said it was the power of attorney revocation dated 2 years ago, signed, witnessed, filed, and done. Dad reached for it, and I held my hand on the corner and added that the bank confirmations were in too, that he no longer had access, and that if another dollar left my account without my approval we moved from a family talk to a police report. Jason snorted and asked if I was really going to call the cops on my parents, making a crack about Captain Rules, and I met his eyes and told him calmly that I'd do whatever was necessary to protect what I'm responsible for, because that's what adults do. Mom snapped that adults share and Grandma corrected her, saying disciplined, explaining that I'm disciplined because they taught me love only shows up when you're useful, and the room went dead quiet, even the kids stopping their fork clatter. I turned to Lily and told her tuition was already paid from my new account directly to the school, that she'd get the email tonight, and that nothing would ever be bundled again, and her face folded in on itself with relief and embarrassment as she apologized, which I shut down immediately because none of this was on her. I looked back at Dad and told him he owed me the amount he took for the church raffle and whatever he slid onto Jason's card, and that he had 30 days, and when his ears flushed and he warned me about my tone, Grandma told him to watch his actions and urged me to keep going. I turned to Jason and told him he had 60 days to return the preschool payments he charged to my account, and that if he couldn't, the school could invoice him directly because I'd send them the paperwork. And when Lauren started to stand and said I wouldn't dare, I told her to try me, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my gums as I reminded them they chose a private academy and they could pay for it themselves. Mom let out a sharp laugh and asked if we were just pretending family doesn't help family. And I told her we weren't pretending anything. We were drawing a line and keeping it, which made Dad shove his chair back and call me ungrateful, saying they raised me, prompting Grandma to slam her hand on the table and say they exploited me, using legal documents they had no right to just to treat me like a vending machine for their favorite son. Jason rolled his eyes and started in, and Grandma shut him down without even looking at him, while the twins stared wide-eyed until I softened my voice, asked if they wanted to help me with the rolls, and watched them scramble over, happy to have a mission because kids understand storms even when they don't have the words. I stood and said I was taking Grandma and Lily for a walk, told my parents I expected a repayment plan and real apologies when I got back. Not sorry I was upset, but sorry they did this. And when Mom opened her mouth, I raised a hand and told her to save it because she'd been talking for years. Grandma nodded once, and we left the table like a clean evacuation, quiet, orderly, precise, stepping into cold air that bit just enough to feel like I'd finally cleared 10,000 feet of rough air. We walked past the maple Dad planted when it was just a stick and whose leaves had finally let go, Grandma linking her arm through mine, and Lily walking close on my other side, small again for a moment, the girl with the flashlight. Grandma said she knew something was wrong, mentioning how Mom kept bragging about Jason's entrepreneur spirit and that she'd assumed it meant he finally got a job, and I told her he did. It just happened to be my account, which made Lily let out a wet sound that almost counted as a laugh before she said she should have called me sooner and didn't want to be a burden. I told her she never is, and that if she calls me at 3 in the morning I'll pick up on the first ring, even though I could see it hadn't sunk in yet, because it takes time to rewrite a script. We circled the block once, then again, and I checked my watch like I was timing cooling engines, not wanting to go back in, but not wanting to stay out either, wishing I was in a cockpit where problems are technical and the checklist is printed. Grandma broke the silence and told me I did right, that I used facts and didn't yell, and when I admitted I wanted to, she said yelling is for people who confuse volume with being right. We went back inside to a house that smelled like cinnamon and hot plates, Dad standing stiff by the sink, Mom near the stove with her arms crossed, and Jason and Lauren nowhere to be seen, probably outside filming a story about gratitude. The twins were sprawled on the floor with the dog, arguing over a Lego guy who'd lost his hair, when Dad turned to me and said they'd talked and would make me whole. I asked when, and Mom sighed and told me not to act like a bill collector in my own home. So I told her I was in my own home. It just happened to be theirs today. Dad rubbed the back of his neck and said 60 days, and I countered with 30 and added that I wanted the first transfer by Friday. Not a promise, but a wire, and we stared at each other until he muttered fine. I said good, then told them they would call the school and remove my name from any arrangement with Jason, give the school his billing information, and do it today. And when Mom worried about the school calling them, I said they could call Jason instead. Grandma told us all to sit, poured herself a small glass of wine like she'd earned it, lifted it toward me, and said to Lines, and I echoed it back. Dinner was stiff at first, and then it wasn't. The twins told me about a class pet with a dramatic backstory. Lily told Grandma about a simulator she loved. Mom tried to redirect things toward Jason's business until Grandma stared her down, and Dad chewed like the turkey was personally at fault. After dessert, Jason and Lauren came back in, Lauren smiling like sponge sugar and saying we're all one family, and this felt confrontational, and I told her choices have consequences, and that isn't confrontation, it's gravity. Jason shuffled, then squared himself and admitted quietly that he'd gotten in over his head, thought he could make it back fast with some drop-shipping pivot, and I stopped him gently and told him not to pitch me, watching him close his mouth like it was a new skill. I told him he could send money back in installments as long as it added up by day 30, but I wasn't underwriting his life, and he nodded once and said okay. Lauren snapped that it was easy for me to act superior with my little plain paycheck, and I told her I make money because I work when most people are asleep and because I learn from watching what happens when you don't plan, which she didn't like. So she left and Jason followed with his shoulders slumped. Mom cornered me by the fridge and whispered that I humiliated them, and I said out loud that they stole from me. And when she said they didn't really, they just managed resources, I told her to call it whatever she wanted because it would not happen again. She said I'd always been so proud, and I said I'd always been careful, and that pride is what made her call the twins better, which hit her hard enough to make her flinch, and when she tried to deny it, I told her she did, and one day the kids would be old enough to remember. She looked toward the living room where the twins were trying to put a Lego helmet on the dog, softened for a second, then hardened and whispered that she didn't understand because they never got help and wanted to do it differently. And I told her they did it differently by making someone else the parent and choosing me without asking. Grandma's voice floated in and said the bill for doing it differently was due and to pay it. That night, after I dropped Grandma at her place and hugged Lily in the driveway until she laughed because I wouldn't let go, I sat in my car and opened my banking app and saw a pending transfer, then another pending transfer, $2,000 from Dad with the memo partial, and I exhaled, not in gratitude or forgiveness, but in data, a first step. The next morning, I emailed the school asking them to remove me from any billing tied to the twins' last name and to attach Jason and Lauren for future invoices, CC Dad and Mom, and attach the ledger again because I wanted it to exist in more than one place. Then drove to the airport, parked, rolled my carry-on over cold concrete, and felt a small click as a boundary locked into place. Boundaries aren't fences to me. They're flight plans. You file them. You follow them. And when the weather shifts, you adjust, but you still know where you're going. Over the next 2 weeks, the wires came in uneven, 600, 400, 1,500, then nothing twice, and I kept a log and sent a polite reminder with 17 days remaining, and Dad replied with a single period. On day 19, an unknown number called, the preschool asking about tuition because they had me listed, and I told them evenly they didn't, that they had Jason and Lauren, and to check their email from November 24th. And after a pause, she apologized, and I said no problem, happy to clarify. After I hung up, I sat on a quiet terminal bench and let my hands shake, not from fear but from the adrenaline dropping. Let it pass. Ate a stale protein bar and boarded. The last transfer cleared on day 28 with the memo we're even, which we weren't because even isn't numbers, it's trust, and you can't wire that. I didn't tell anyone at work because pilots are good at checklists and bad at mothers. But on a Portland turn, the captain rested his coffee on his knee and asked if I was okay, said I had that 1,000-yard stare of someone who once slept in his car, and I told him I was fine, and he nodded like he'd said the same thing before and told me to take a day if I needed it. And I said I'd take a boundary, which he called a good trade. December slid into January. Lily texted me pictures of a wing inspection she'd learned, pointing out a fuel cap and saying her coach thought she was a natural, and I saved it and sent her a photo of a sunrise over clouds so smooth they looked fake and typed that she belonged up there, and she sent back crying emojis and a plane. Mom sent a group text about a New Year's brunch. I didn't go and replied politely that I was flying and hoped it was nice, and she wrote back that they missed me and sent a picture of Jason and the twins in matching sweaters with no apology and no reflection, just the surface, which used to gut me and now just registered as weather I didn't have to fly through. Grandma called every Sunday to tell me about her neighbor snowblowing the wrong driveway, and her new doctor, who looked 12. Then she'd ask how my heart was, and I'd say learning, and she'd say good boy. Last week, after a long Zurich turn, I brought her oranges. She opened the door in slippers and kissed my cheek, and said I looked like I'd crossed 3 time zones. And over tea, she said my mother thought I was punishing them, and I said I wasn't. I was protecting myself. And she nodded into the silence as the clock ticked and a plow scraped by and reminded me how my grandfather made me say at 12 that I was responsible for the car and everyone in it, and that at some point you choose who rides. I told her I didn't want them cut off, I just couldn't be the bank, and she said then don't. The price is a boundary and an apology, and if they can't pay it they stay home. I looked at my pilot hands and realized how responsible had turned into a leash, saw that Thanksgiving table again, Dad's better, Grandma standing, Lily's eyes, and noticed my hands weren't shaking anymore, and said I felt lighter, that I slept and ate sitting down, and Grandma smiled and said freedom has boring symptoms. On the way out I straightened the crooked tag on the maple and it felt right, and in the car I typed, deleted, then sent a simple message saying I love you. I won't fund your choices, respect that. I'm here, and if not I wish them well. No speech, just a filed plan. In the crew lounge a new first officer slumped and said he'd blown an engine out, and I told him he'd fix it and added that you choose what you're responsible for in the sim and in life. And later at 36,000 feet, I thought about better kids and knew my kids are my responsibilities, my future family, Lily's dream, my boundaries. And when the captain glanced over and said smooth, I agreed, because I'm Greg, a pilot, a former wallet, and the owner of my time and peace, and if respect comes back I'm here, and if it doesn't I'll keep flying, because the sky's still there and the plan is filed.